Well, we're having some catch-ups with some ministers, and this is a great opportunity to find out more in depth than we obviously get with our two questions at the press conferences. With me, obviously, Minister of Education, Sport and Leisure, amongst things, Dr. Allison. If you don't mind, because we've got the time, I'd like this thing to breathe a bit. I'd like us to go back over things so maybe the public and ourselves can get more of a full understanding of what exactly happened to build up to the second lockdown, because it was such a sort of, to the public anyway, it seemed like a bit of mixed messaging had been going on. So if you don't mind, should we go back? Start with that Friday with the case, so then we had the weekend, then the schools went in on Monday, then they closed and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, from a personal point of view, I was looking forward to a really nice weekend because everything seemed to be quiet beforehand. There were a couple of really big events that I know lots of people were really looking forward to. I was out on Friday night, went for a nice meal with some friends, and then everything changed. Got a phone call first thing on Saturday morning that a case had been picked up by somebody who works out of hours at the Hague School, who'd been found to be positive for coronavirus, hadn't been in school for a couple of days. But they couldn't trace him back to the steam packet cluster. And that was the first really worrying phase that we've got community spread on the island. So called into Comyn meeting first thing Saturday morning. All our Comyn meetings, we have as much input as possible. I know that there's been various people saying, well, what expert advice did you have? We will call in anyone we need. So we've got people from Track and Trace literally going through things in real time. And often, particularly on the Saturday, we had a meeting in the morning, came back after lunch to see how many new cases were there as they were being processed. We also have the Director of Public Health, we have the Head of Department of Health and Social Care, the CEO, and we will get other people in as we need them. If we need the police in to brief us, we will get that in. But it became apparent on Saturday that we had cases that couldn't be traced back. There were 2 cases on Saturday, and we had to then think very quickly about what we were going to do to keep the country safe. We didn't have enough evidence at the time that there was a good case for complete lockdown all over again. We just come out of one a week or 2 beforehand, and we're desperately trying not to do that again. But we did give out the advice not to go ahead with some of the big mass gatherings that were going to happen on that Saturday night. We had several big balls and presentations that I'm sure you were invited to, as well as a lot of other people, involving hundreds of people, some of those clinically vulnerable elderly people. And we had to make a judgment call to advise people to stay at home on that Saturday night. We didn't have necessarily the time to bring in regulations and get that through. We needed to get that out there and then met up again on first thing on Sunday morning to go through new evidence that was coming through. And it was conflicting. We were, getting people in to advise us in terms of the number of cases, where they were, who they were linked to. And so by Sunday, we had evidence that there was 2, perhaps 3 cases in the community, but that was a bit unclear, and people were trying to do the contact tracing. And at that point, we had to make a decision about whether to go back into straight to lockdown, whether we opened the schools again on the Monday. And the consensus around the Council of Ministers was not to do so at that time, to allow schools to open, to allow people to go back to the business as normal, but keep a really close eye on it. We did that. And then, unfortunately, by Monday evening, it became clear that the first case we'd had of a person in a school came about. And so 9:30 Monday night, decided to go straight into lockdown. We talked about that over the weekend. We had to enact it on Monday night. The teacher at St Ninian's, head teacher, was informed of that one of their pupils was affected. Whole of Year 8 was asked to self-isolate. We started closing schools down. All the head teachers were talked to the following morning, and we closed down schools on the Tuesday.
Yeah, okay. Let's just go back to this Monday, because that's when we had the questions, and I think I was one that asked, amongst others, that how on earth did you imagine it was only going to stay within this 1 year group? You ask them to keep away. These are schools. People go to the loos, they open doors, all sorts of things go on.
Absolutely, Paul. I mean, first of all, to close all of the education system down, to close all schools down, is not something we do lightly. I think we all now acknowledge the effect it has on children's education, but also their mental health and well-being. So it's not something we're just going to do willy-nilly. At the time, we were looking at the best evidence we had. We were taking the advice from public health and advice from the Track and Trace team. The person involved at St Ninian's, they thought they'd managed to isolate it to that year group. They didn't think that at that time there was a particularly high risk of spread. but we decided to close schools down. What we normally do is a managed closure of schools. We've done that the last 2 lockdowns, giving parents a time to actually make the right modifications, making sure those kids leave with schoolwork. If you try to close schools down quickly, if we'd have suddenly said, right, schools aren't open tomorrow, I know kids would have been dropped off at the school gates because the parents wouldn't have got that message. I went on Manx Radio, tried to get the message out. I know social media was very good, but it's still very hard to close schools down without giving parents and pupils the notice of that.
Yeah, but you could have a snow day in the old days, Miss Allison. I mean, Dr. Allison. I mean, a snow day, things to stop. You have to react to it and make the best of it, right?
Yep. And we're doing snow days after a day. Snow days are just a very temporary measure. This was going into another circuit breaker lockdown. We thought it was going to be 21 days. It's now been longer than that. We need to allow people to prepare, but also to get the word out that we do have an issue in schools and that we are concerned about pupils. And so we also got the message out that if parents didn't want to send their children to school on Tuesday, absolutely fine. But we've always tried to manage this with head teachers, with parents, with pupils to get an organised closure of schools down. So that's why they were still open on the Tuesday. The numbers gradually dropped off over the Tuesday. People went home and we were allowed to prepare people to switch straight back into distance learning, but also those vulnerable children and those key workers to go in on the Wednesday.
Wasn't it Monday you went on the radio just to say that you didn't have to go in that day if you didn't want to? I mean, wasn't that already you saying don't go?
The press releases on Monday night went out late because that's when we got the information. The council ministers met at 9:30 that evening to actually make the decision about going into a full lockdown, which would involve schools as well. So that information went out. I think the press release was put out on Manx Radio sort of 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. Tried to do it again first thing in the morning, try to get the information out there. But it is we need to handle closure of schools in a compassionate way for everyone involved and try to keep people as safe as possible, but transition back into remote learning and the sort of hub school system.
Did you have the data remind us at the time that this was, in fact, the new Kent variant, the much more aggressive one, especially for children? Did you have that when you made this decision, or were you still waiting for that info to come back?
I mean, that's a very good question, and I think the answer has been in a Timwell question. The actual genomics results of that came out a couple of days later. However, we had assumed we had the Kent variant. I mean, it was 80%, I think, or more of cases in the UK are now the Kent variant. I think looking back to January when we had the scare and there were a couple of mass events, including up in Ramsey, when we went into lockdown, we had to assume it was the Kent variant. At that time, it turned out not to be. It was the older variant, which is less transmissible. But public health attitude right the way through was we had to assume this was Kent variant, that it was going to be more transmissible, that it was going to affect children more than we'd seen in the past. When there was an isolated case at St Mary's back earlier on in the year, there was no evidence of spread to anyone else in the school. And that surprised us. That turned out to be not Kent. This has been Kent variant, so we built that into some of the calculations and some of the projections we had that this could spread relatively quickly throughout our population.
I appreciate hindsight, such a great thing, but looking back on that, then do you think it should have been done faster and quicker, that lockdown with the children in the schools?
Yeah, there's always hindsight and there's always lessons to be learned. Again, on the Sunday, and we spend a lot of time trying to get as much information to make the decision. None of us, and I'm sure none of the country, wanted us to go back into a lockdown. Certainly as Minister, I don't want to close schools down, and I'm only going to do it when there is a real danger to the health and welfare of staff and pupils. On Sunday, there didn't seem to be. There was no obvious links into the school community. As soon as that became apparent on Monday and a pupil was involved who'd been in the school the previous week, we closed them all down as soon as we possibly could. Could we have done it faster? Could we have gone a snow day scenario? Yes, we could have done. But again, all the way through this, we've been trying to manage this in the right way, in an organised way, to support pupils and their parents and teachers. And we did that again this time. Each of these times, though, we will learn different lessons. I hope we never have to go into lockdown again. I hope the exit strategy works and the vaccination programme stops us from having to do this. But each time we go through this scenario, we will learn lessons and we will put them into play in the future.
Something I'm sure you're not going to answer is where the fault lies, because you'll say it's collective responsibility with Komen, but you also did say you take information from the experts. So someone really should have advised else.
Yeah,
not
yeah,
that.
and again, that's I suppose the difficulty. Where does the fault lie? I'm going to say to you, I don't think fault is the right word here. This is a judgment call. This is that weekend, I think, was the hardest judgment call we've ever had to make as a council of ministers, because there was no right answer. Do you close everything down on 2 cases in the community, or do you not? That's what it comes down to. That's a judgment call. You can have all the data, all the scenarios. At the end of the day, it comes down to the ministers sitting around that table who have to reach a consensus and then stand by that. And if people think we've got it wrong and we could have done something different, absolutely take on their opinion. But at that day, on Sunday, when we were faced with the various options we had to make a judgment call, and we did that.
And backbencher Julie Edge said, have you considered your position?
Yep. And she's asked a couple of times, and my answer to you would be exactly the same. The answer to her in Tynwald and to the press will be the same to you. Yes, I have considered my opinion. This has been really difficult. This has been a really difficult time. What we are going, and I've also tried to reflect on why it's been different this time. This lockdown's hit people a huge amount more than the last 2. People are angry. They're frustrated with the situation. I think one of the answers to that is we're fed up of this. We want a way out, and we've got that now with the exit strategy. But also, as individuals and as a community, we've been going through complex grief. We have lost so much over the last 12 months, including 26 residents. We've also lost the ability to hug. We've lost the ability to go across to see family and friends. We've all lost stuff, and that has an effect on you. And I think that's now coming out, and something we need to deal with both as individuals, but also in terms of politicians. So, do I look at my position again? Do I think I'm the right person for the job at the moment? Yeah, but I question everything I do and make sure it's for the right reason, at the right time, based on all the information that we've got. And then, as a minister, I have to stand by that decision and take the criticism when it comes.